All right, Javosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tafshin Pei 5785. We thank the Tilson family from R Yisrael for dedicating all the Shumer Drashos this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for all of Am Yisroel. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei Abba Leilun L'Tova, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband, the 53 years, Dr. Paul Weinberg Peretz Moshe Ben Avraham David, on the commemoration of his fourth yahrzeit, and Avraham and Shaindy Kelman in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Friderica David. We thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Jonathan and Ilana Austein of R Yisrael, as a token of Hakaras Hatov to Jonathan's brother-in-law, Avi Tobias, of Edison, New Jersey, for introducing him to the shiur. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to give the entire Chabra, the entire shiur, the strength and wisdom to keep on plowing through the Yam Shel Talmud, and may we zochem Yirtzeh Hashem to continued bracha, hatzlacha in our learning in our avodas Hashem in the year and in the years ahead. We thank again the Austein Mishpacha very much. So beautiful to have, they say, Kimi Tzion Teitzei Torah. So Baruch Hashem, it feels like Kimi Tzion Teitzei support, Kimi Tzion Teitzei Kemach, Baruch Hashem, that allows us to continue to provide the Torah here. So truly beautiful, truly incredible, and we thank all of our sponsors in such a special way. So also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Kuf Vav. Kuf Vav 106, and we are picking up Yirtzeh Hashem on Kuf Vav, Amud Aleph at the Mishnah. So we'll say a really great Mishnah ahead of us today. So the Mishnah says as follows: B'simanav u'meitzarav. So listen to this. So now look at this case. So once again, I am purchasing a field from Ruvain. Now in this particular case, I go to purchase the field, and Ruvain says as follows. Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, "Ha'omer lechavero beis kor afarni mocher lecha b'so chasimanin v'meitzarim halalu sha'at harotza kol kachlach." So I go to Ruvain. I say, Ruvain's selling me a field. And what Ruvain does is Ruvain demarcates the field. Simanav literally means with identifying marks. Meitzarav means it's borders. So for example, Ruvain says, I'm selling you this field, and on the northern border it has this fence, and on the southern border it has, this line of trees, and on the eastern border it has this. And he defines the parameters of the field, giving explicit simanim, signs, and meitzarav, borders. Okay? Now what ends up happening? What ends up happening is now the lashon of the sale is as follows. Ruvain is saying, I'm selling you a base core, so he's telling me the size of the parcel that he is selling to me, and he also gives me the identifying signs on, it doesn't have to be on all sides. The point is he gives me the clear outline of the field. Beautiful. It turns out that the field is less than a base car. It could be more also, but for our purpose, we'll call it less than a base car. So the identifying signs were correct. In other words, he gave me the proper boundaries. It's just that the field is not a base car, and he told me that he's selling me a base car. So what's the halacha? Pachos mishasos higiu ad shasosinake. So if it turns out that halacha l'maisa, the field is less than a base car, but it's missing less than a sixth. Right? In other words, it's less than a sixth deficient from the base car. Higiu means halacha l'maisa, it works. Now, by the way, the Rashbam points out to where pachos mishusos higiu dahainu tfei mirov l'sa kiflei giflaim d'shusos hainu kav l'sa. So if it's missing less than a kav, one kav per sa, again, we don't have to get necessarily today into all of the exact measurements, but the idea over here is when the Mishnah says it's missing less than a sixth, it means it's missing less than a kav per sa, the transaction stands. Higiu means it stands and that's it. It stands. In other words, because that would be a forgivable amount. However, the Mishnah says, ad shesos, if it's up to a six, now we'll have to see exactly what that means. Yinacha. Yinacha means that ultimately, again, Reuven will deduct from the purchase price. In other words, I paid him $50,000 for the field. Now it turns out that there's more than a sixth. We'll see exactly what amounts we're talking about over here. More than a sixth missing. Then we settle up again on the sale. Then we'll deduct some money from the purchase price, reflecting the fact that I did not get a base car. So a very important halacha. So again, I go to Reuven agrees to give me a base car. In this case, interestingly enough, there's two things that are happening. Number one, the size of the parcel. Number two, the demarcated borders. It turns out borders were correct, but it's less than a base car. So now what's the status of the transaction? Which is very simple. If it's less than a sixth, pretty much forgivable. Forgivable, the transaction stands. A sixth, well, we'll see, we'll call it more than a sixth. We'll see exactly what happens at a sixth. More than a sixth, this transaction stands, but we'll readjust the pricing. So essentially, Ruben is going to refund me for the difference between what a base car would have been and what he actually sold me. Beautiful. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Yinocha. So it's in the intermediate wide lines, about 3 lines in. Yinocha min adamim v'imhoser yachzilo karka v'hai shesus lav mishum din ona de'ein ona el metaltali aval b'mekarkoi ein ona shemachalo shavar pruta b'mana o shavar mana b'pruta higio el shiura d'rabanan hi dahachi machal inish hechadarm b'simana b'chatzar tfeila machal. So it's very important. When I say a sixth, you think. Oh no, okay, good. I felt like my whole everything. Good, all right. There's a delay. There's a delay on this, right? Hey, so let's say this. So we think, oh no. Now remember, we've learned this. Oh no, 101. There's no oh no by real estate. This is incredibly important. We know this even today. Real estate is a fascinating entity because real estate is worth different things for different people, right? If I go into I'm looking to buy a car, right? So a Honda is a Honda, right? In other words, that okay, maybe a little more, a little bit here, but there's a baseline for it, and no one's going to feel any differently about a Honda. They're going to say I have to have this Honda, that I need to go ahead and pay an exorbitant amount of money for it. Real estate is different. The halacha is there is no halachos of ona'ah by real estate. Because again, real estate has different levels of importance. So therefore, again, the Gemara, so Rashman points out over here, the sixth over here is not about ona'ah. The sixth over here is, in general, how much is a person willing to forgive in the course of a transaction. But it's not ona'ah. So therefore, the Mishnah says, if it turns out that I thought I was getting a base car of land, but it turns out I was getting a base car minus less than a sixth, it's fine. It's fine. That doesn't matter to me as much. I'm willing to forego that. More than a sixth, I'm not willing to forego that, and therefore we have to resettle. But we'll say that's why. By the way, normally that you know already from the Mishnah that it's not onah. I know from the Mishnah that it's not onah. In the halachos of onah, what happens if you overcharge by more than a sixth? Right, it's voided. Right, the transaction is voided. So if you notice over here, there's no discussion of voiding a transaction. What you have over here is at more than a sixth, then Reuben's going to have to refund me money. And by the way, I just want to point out, we're only framing this in one direction, namely that Reuben sold me less land than a base car. But of course, the same halacha would apply if it turns out that Reuben oversold me land. It turns out that it's more than a base car. It's just easier to illustrate with Reuben selling me less than a base car. Okay, so that's the halacha in the Mishnah. So I'll say, so now we come to an interesting discussion. Itmar, Rav Huna Amar Shasus. So now the Mishnah essentially frames this in two different ways. There's a real estate transaction where Reuben told me he was selling me a base car, and he sells me less than a base car. In case number one, it's less than a sixth less. And in case number two, it's more than a sixth less. What about if it's exactly 1/6? Exactly a shasus. So that's why what's confusing about this is this sounds so much like an ona'ah discussion, because remember again, in ona'ah itself you have these 3 categories as well. Less than a sixth, and more than a sixth. But again, we just have to keep on reminding ourselves over and over, this is not ona'ah, this is not ona'ah, this is not ona'ah, because ein ona'ah bikarkos. So again, the Gemara says as follows: Seitmar Rafuna Amar Shesus Kepachos Mishesus. So say, by the way, isn't it incredible if you think about it also, when we figure out this idea of ein ona'ah bikarkos, because you cannot measure the value that karka has to a person. So I will say, you think about what is unfolding now for Am Yisroel and for Eretz Yisrael. You think about Eretz Yisrael as one little strip of land. One little strip of land. So someone from the outside might say, come on, Klal Yisrael, come on. Is it really worth it? All of this for one little piece of land? Is that really, is the price worth it? And what do? We open up to Basra, Kovav, Amadaf, say, world, you don't understand. Ein ona'ah bikarkos. When it comes to the value of land is measured in a fundamentally different way. and the value of ancestral land is valued in a totally different way than that. And the value of ancestral land that you didn't simply inherit from your ancestors, but was given to you by the Ribono Shel Olam as a Yerusha, as a Nachala, is simply immeasurable. So the Gemara says as follows: Se'it marafuna amar shasus kipachos mishasus. Rav says, now what happens if Reuven sold me exactly less than 1/6 of a base car? So what's halakha? So Rav says 1/6 is the equivalent. So exactly a sixth is the equivalent to less than a sixth. What's halakha with less than a sixth? Totally forgivable, and no financial settling up is necessary. Rav Yehuda Amar Shasos Kios Mishasos. Rav Yehuda says no. A sixth is like 1/6 is like more than a sixth. Okay, and therefore again, Allah Lamaisa, Reuven would have to refund some of my money. Fine, so let's analyze. Rav Huna Amar Shasos Kipachos Mishasos. So Rav Huna said a sixth is like less than a sixth. Hakikama. This is how you read the Mishnah. Pachos mishasos ushasos bechlal higiu. That if Reuven ended up selling me less land as defined from less than a sixth up until a sixth higiu. Okay, so that's how Rav Huna understands the Mishnah. Reuven told me he was selling me a base car. He even outlined the boundaries of the field. The boundaries were correct, but it turns out that it's less than a base car. So as long as it's under a sixth, up to a sixth less, the transaction stands, and no need to financially renegotiate. And when I say financially renegotiate, I mean a refund. No need for a refund. Okay. However, again, if it turns out that he sold me more than 1/6 less than a base car, then he has to refund me from some of the purchase price. Okay, so that's Rav Huna. Rav Yehuda says, Shasos kiyoser mishasos. Rav Yehuda says, no. Exactly a sixth is treated like more than a sixth. And therefore, the difference has to be refunded. The Gemara says, Haki Kamar, this is what it means to say. Haki Kamar, Pachos mishasos higio ad shasos. That's what it means to say. Less than a sixth. So if halacha again, Reuven went ahead and told me he was selling me a base car, and it turns out that he sold me less, but the part that's missing is less than a sixth. Higio, then halacha the transaction stands ad shasos. That is true up until the sixth. Ushasos bichlal yinocha. But from exactly a sixth and on, then Reuven has to refund me the difference. Okay. Beautiful. So let's analyze. So what is this? So again, here's what everybody agrees with, right? Less than a sixth, the transaction stands and no refund necessary. More than a sixth, refund necessary for the difference between natural base car and what the size of the field actually is. 1/6 itself. Rav Huna says 1/6 is like less than a sixth. Rav Yehuda says 1/6 is like more than a sixth. Okay, so now let's analyze. Meisvei marizekasha bisimandev umeitsarav piches shasos o hoser shasos harehu kishum hadayanu higiu. R Silber said this is a very interesting statement, which we're going to see in just a moment is inherently contradictory and problematic. But let's at least go through it to begin with. Gemara says as follows. So let's say again, Reuven is selling me a field, and once again, this field is outlined with its boundary markers and simanim. So in other words, not only is Reuven telling me, Silber, I'm selling you a core of land, but he actually identifies the boundaries of the field. So what's the halacha? So now, if it turns out, piches shasos or hoser shasos, if it turns out that it's actually less than less than a sixth less than a base car, or hoser shasos, or for that matter, again, it's more than a sixth larger than a base car. So harihu kishuma dayanim. This is like any case that is adjudicated by dayanim, right? This is like any case. Shuma dayanim means like a judicial valuation, right? A judicial assessment, and higiu. And ultimately, the transaction stands. Okay, so I'll say, so take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. So b'simanev meisvei Rav Huna. So the Gemara says the kashan Rav Huna, who holds that a sixth is like less than a sixth. So the Rashbam says over in the next one, b'simanev meitzara pichei shesos ahoser shesos kishuma dayanim b'ksuvas parkaman in his honest tanan shuma dayanim shepichsu shesos ohosiru shesos machran batal. So we'll say, so the halacha is in general, if you have a case that comes to Beis Din, and Beis Din makes a valuation on something, right? They make a valuation, and their valuation turns out to be off by a sixth. So the halach is mechran batal. So the transaction that they oversaw is void. So here, Rashan gives an example of this. Let's say a situation of right, Reuven is married to Rachel, Reuven died, left behind an estate. Now, again, Reuven's estate has an obligation to support his widow, Rachel. So what happens? Beis Din, and let's say the Yisomim are Ketanim, so Beis Din comes along and Beis Din sells off property for the support of the widow. But it turns out that when Beis Din sold the property, they made a mistaken valuation, and they ended up underselling, or for that matter, we'll call it underselling the property by a sixth. So the halacha is that their valuation, their transaction, is batal. So obviously you know where this is going, right? Where is this going? That you see from here that a sixth is really treating halacha like more than a sixth, which ultimately is a kasha on Rav Huna. So now the Gemara says, so now the Gemara says, back to the Gemara, when it comes to judicial valuation, we see that 1/6 is treated like more than a sixth. So this is a kasha on Rav Huna and a support to Rav Yehuda. So the Gemara says, take a look at the Rashbam. When judges make a valuation and sell property based on that valuation, so when they go ahead and they make a mistake of a sixth, so 1/6 is treated like more than a sixth. Alma ki yeser mishesosu v'yachzir v'kashil Rav Huna. Shabbos says halacha l'maisa. The point over here is, what do you see? So again, how does the brisa read? The brisa says like this: if we went ahead and sold the field, right, sold the base car, and the base car was identified with its border markings and its simanim, right? So now, and you went ahead and piche shusos ohos shusos, and let's say Reuven ended up overselling it or underselling it to me by more than a sixth, then that, or by a sixth, then hari kishum dayanim higiu. Then Allah chalamayis is like a judicial valuation, and the transaction works. Now, I will say that statement is inherently contradictory, as we're going to note in just a moment. But before we get to higiu, the Brisa says that a sixth in real estate transactions is treated like judicial valuation. So there's two things happening over here. What's the halakha with judicial valuations? Beis Din takes a piece of property and Beis Din sells it. Right? Reuven's married, one more time. Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven dies, leaves behind the widow. The estate has an obligation to support the widow. So what does Beis Din do? Beis Din sells off a parcel of Reuven Zichron of Rachel's land in order to support his widow Rachel. Beis Din evaluates it. They sell it. It turns out that Beis Din was off by a sixth. What's the halacha? Transaction batal. Transactional. What do you see from that case? That 1/6 is treated like more than a sixth. That is a kasha on Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said that 1/6 is treated like less than a sixth. So the Gemara says, Rav Huna will say, 1 second, Chevra, we have a bigger problem. The brisa doesn't make sense. Why doesn't the brisa make sense? Because the brisa said that if Reuven sells me a piece of land, sells me a base car, and he identifies the borders of the base car, and it turns out that Reuven was off by a sixth, so we treat the case like judicial valuation, but the transaction stands. That is an inherently contradictory statement. Because if you're treating it like a judicial valuation, then what should be the halacha? It's void. It's void because by judicial valuation, 1/6 avoids the transaction. Yet you're saying we're treating it like a judicial valuation, but the transaction stands. That doesn't make any sense. Rav Huna says, it's not a kasha on me. The brisa itself is inherently contradictory. Ella, the Gemara says, you're right. Ella, rather, what you have to say is like this. The transaction is treated like judicial valuation and not like judicial valuation. How so? So I say, the Gemara says, rather, the transaction is treated like a judicial valuation and not like a judicial valuation. How so? Like a judicial valuation, that 1/6 is meaningful. But not like a judicial valuation, in that what? By a judicial valuation, 1/6 voids the transaction, but in this case over here, it does not void the transaction. Rather, the transaction stands. The transaction stands. So the way the Rav Huna is interpreting the Brisa, which seems to be the only way to really interpret the Brisa, is what the Brisa is saying is like this: 1/6 is a meaningful amount because more than that is going to require a resettling, right? A refund or extra payment. But halacha l'maisa, again, unlike judicial valuation, where 1/6 voids the transaction, by a real estate transaction, 1/6 will not void it. The real estate transaction still stands. Higiyu means halacha l'maisa, it still stands. So it turns out that the brisa is not a contradiction to our law. So we'll say, so here's what we have. So just to kind of frame everything. Right? So the first thing that's important to understand is this is not ono. Not ono, right? Why is this not ono? Why is it not ono? Ain't ono b'karkos. Okay, so already, even though we're using the same numbers, it is not ono. So now the Gemara tells me like this. Let's frame our case. I'm buying a parcel of land from Ruvain. Now the nice part in this case is there's two things that's happening. Ruvain is telling me how much land there is a base car. He's also demarcating the field, right, with simanim. Beautiful. So I agree. We agree on a purchase price. It turns out the land is less than a base car. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, well, it depends how much less. If it's less than 1/6 difference, negligible, forgivable, move on with life. More than 1/6, we just need to settle up, which means Ruvain's going to have to refund me some of the money, a corresponding amount of the purchase price. What if it's exactly 1/6 less? Machlokes. Rav Huna says 1/6 is treated like less than 1/6. Rav Yehuda says 1/6 is treated like more than 1/6. Gemara introduces us to what appears now to be an unrelated piece of halacha. We thought it was related, but now it's unrelated. Shema dayanim, judicial valuation, which means Beis Din valuated property in order to sell it off. What happens if Beis Din makes a mistake? So halacha l'maisa, again, less than 1/6, once again, is negligible. But at 1/6 or more, halacha l'maisa, the transaction is void. Okay, good. Last line of Kufav Mendal. Rav Papa, story time. Rav Papa, Zabin Arameahu Gadra. Rav Papa bought a field from a guy. Amud Beis, Amrlei, Hadin Esrin Garyuve. So what happened? So the guy said to Rav Papa, the land is 20 Garyuve. Okay, so this was a measurement. Fine. So Mashrei, so Rav Papa bought it. Afterwards, he measured it. Mashrei v'lo havi ela chamisra. See what happened after Rav Papa bought it. He measured it, and what happens? Halacha l'maisa. He saw that it was only 15 geryuye. So again, it was off by 5. So Asal Kamei da Abaye. So Rav Papa brought this guy to the Torah front of Abaye. Says, he told me that I was buying a parcel of land that was 20 geryuye, and it turns out that it was only 15. So the Gemara says, Amrlei. So Abaye says to him, Savris v'kabilas. You accepted it. You knew what you were buying, and you accepted it. Suppose it's now obviously this is more than 1/6, right? Obviously more than 1/6. So halacha l'maisa, again, this should be grounds. This should be grounds for a refund. Again, apparently by karka, you're not going to be able to necessarily void the transaction, but you should get a refund. So Rav Papa says, I'm owed money. Abaye says, no, you knew it. Literally, again, Savris v'kabilas means you knew what was happening over here, and you accepted it. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? So Rav Papa says, that's now we learned, Pachos mishasus igiu, ad shasus yinoke. So Boaz said, what about the Mishnah? This is a real estate transaction that is off by more than 1/6. Right? Halacha l'maisa, again, I should be entitled to a refund. To which Abaye says something very interesting. So Gemara says, Hani mili heicha de lo kimli begava. That's when you're not familiar with the field. But again, remember, I will say, that's why the story is very important. Rav Papa was standing in the field, which means, number one, Rav Papa had the opportunity to measure it before the transaction. And number two, even just by eyeballing it, he should have been able to see what the size of the field was. So Abaye says, Rav Papa, you were standing there, you saw it, you knew what was going on. So essentially, Abaye says, Rav Papa, you knew that the field was smaller than the stated amount, and therefore halacha l'maisa you were makabelit. Aval halcha de kimle bigava, but here ultimately, literally, you were standing in the field. You were aware of what you were buying. Savar v'kabil. You went ahead and you accepted it for what it was. Fascinating. Right? You were standing there, in other words, so we'll say, so essentially what Abaye says is, what's the Mishnah's case? The Mishnah's case could be, I'm buying a parcel of land, sight unseen. Right? So I'm buying it, I'm somewhere else, or the land is somewhere else, I don't know it. So again, I'm not there. So because I'm not there, I assume that if Ruben's telling me, he's telling me a base score, okay, it's less than a sixth, less, fine, forgivable. But a sixth or more than a sixth, again, then we have to resettle. Abaye says, Rabbi, he's standing there. You're standing in the field. You should be able to eyeball. You should be able to see it, or you can measure it right then and there. The fact that you did it means you're mekabel it in whatever way that it is. The Gemara says, but 1 second. Vaha esrin amrali. Papa says Tabai, but the seller told me. The seller told me it was 20 geriyos. So what are you talking about over here? Doesn't he have an obligation to be truthful? In other words, don't I have a right to rely on what he said? Right? He said I'm selling 20 geriyos. So I don't understand why should he not be held to that standard? So listen to this. Amrlei, so because Rabbi responded to Rapapa, because what he was probably telling you was Amrlei da'adifa ke'esrin. This land is so good. That even though it only actually measures 15 geriyos, it's actually like 20 geriyos. Right? That's how good this land is. Okay. So it's interesting. So halach l'maisa again. So again, we'll have to see if halach l'maisa we accept this. Because Rabbi say this is a very dangerous gemara. Right? Why is it dangerous gemara? Because again, this is essentially saying that halach l'maisa you could verbally misrepresent something, and the onus is on the purchaser. Right? So again, it's interesting because Abaye is totally shifting the responsibility over here to Rav Papa. Right? Rav Papa, you're standing in the field, which I will say, by the way, we've seen in halacha that the purchaser does have responsibility to go ahead and what is it? What's the lashon? Trust but verify. Is that the? Yeah, okay. Right. So in other words, that the purchaser does have, but again, the idea that the seller could actively say the land is 20 when it's really 15. Okay, so we'll have to see halacha. But the point over here is Abaye places the onus on Rav Papa in this case. Tanya. Suppose another interesting case over here, unrelated, but beautiful. Tanya. Rabbi Yossi says, Ha'achin shechelku. Listen to this. So let's say you have Yaakov died, and Yaakov left behind an estate. And in Yaakov's estate, let's say there are, we could start really with just simply, we could do 3 brothers, Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. So what happens? So now, the brothers are splitting up the estate. So Rabbi Yossi says as follows, Kevan sha'ala gora la'echad mehen kanu kulam. Once the Shabbos says, so let's assume right now that, let's say there's no bachar per se. Right? So Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, it could be that there's an older sister, or whatever, the oldest brother is not a technical bachar. So what happens? Now, halacha l'maisa, they divide up the estate, and they have a lottery. So what happens, the Gemara says? So Ruvain's going to choose his lot first. So Yossi says, as soon as Ruvain chooses his lot, all of the other brothers acquire their respective portions as well. So take a look at the Rashbam. This is very interesting. So the Rashbam says, "Alken shechalku bereru shnayim ushlosha chalakin shavin v'achakach yapilu goralos v'leshutfan." So let's say they divide up the estate. They divide up the estate into chelek aleph, chelek beis, and chelek gimel. Portion 1, 2, and 3. Then they put 3 lots into the shtreimel, right? And they're all going to pick out a lot, right? So what happens? Once Reuven picks out his lot, the other brothers acquire their respective lots as well. So look at the Rashbam. Kevan shenafal agora la'echa mehem v'hovra chelko. So once Reuven picks out his lot, so now his portion is established. Kanu kulam. Look at the Rashbam. Kanu kulam. Kilomar zek kanu legamrei begoro. So once Reuven picks out his lot, Reuven acquires his portion, and no one could renegotiate anymore. Obviously, if they all choose 3 of them, but no one could force a renegotiation. So obviously, if it's a case of 2 brothers, it's a little bit easier to understand, right? When Reuven pulls out his portions, obviously in that moment, Shimon instantaneously acquires his portion. What happens if there's 3 brothers? Also shenafalo hagara kana chalko Vashnayim kanu bein shnehem shnei chalokim lechalik beineim kol sha'a sheyirtzu v'af lachlok beinyan acher v'achar kach yapilu gorol. So most of the idea over here is if there are three brothers. So once Reuben picks out his patek, his piece of paper, so Shimon and Levi acquire the rest of the estate to divide amongst themselves evenly. However they decide to do it, they could each pick their portion they could each pick their lottery portion, right, their goral portion, or they could divide it up amongst themselves evenly. But the idea is once Reuven acquires his part, every other brother automatically acquires his part as well. Now again, in the case of three brothers, what that means is the remaining two brothers, they automatically inherit the rest of the estate to be acquired or to be divided evenly amongst them. How that division occurs, do they each want to pick their lottery or do they want to divide it some other way amongst themselves? That's their business. That's their business. Fine. So I'll say, so that's the halacha of Rabbi Yossi. So let's go back to the Gemara. Such a beautiful Gemara. My taimo. Now, why does this work? Right? This is interesting. Why does this work? In other words, we'll say, I would have thought that if you're doing a lottery, when does the division of the estate, when does it become final? Right? After everyone takes their lot. Right? After everyone takes their lot. But that's not the way it works. As soon as Reuben takes his lot, by Reuben acquiring his portion, the other brothers automatically acquire their portions as well. What's the pshat? My time, my boss says it's beautiful. Honorable Lazar, Ketchilas Eretz Yisrael. Because it's similar to the original division of Eretz Yisrael. I will say, the Gemara says now, Ma Tchila Begoro, Afkan Begoro, because ultimately you're going to say, how was Eretz Yisrael divided up? Eretz Yisrael was divided up by a lottery. So just like what ended up happening, the moment that Shevet number 1 chose their lot, so everyone else acquired their respective portion. What Shabbos essentially means is that once the first Shevet acquires its lot, right, that's locked in, which means now he has his portion, everyone else shares in the land, the remaining land equally. That's what it means. Now again, obviously, you still have to be mevarer who's getting what, but the portion there to divide up ultimately becomes clear. So Mar says, 1 second. So you're modeling this after the division of Eretz Yisrael. Let's say one little detail over here, which is Eretz Yisrael was divided up by lottery. You're right. It was also divided up by lottery that was guided by the Urim V'Tumim, right? That was guided up, remember again, by the Shechina. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Bekalvi v'Urim V'Tumim. This is beautiful. So it's in the intermediate wide lines, about 4 lines up from before they end. Bekalvi v'Urim V'Tumim. Kidamin b'Yeshnochlin. Elazar melubash Urim V'Tumim. So beautiful. Elazar, right? Remember again, Elazar was the son of Aaron HaKohen. Aaron had already passed away. So Elazar is wearing the Urim V'Tumim. Remember, they will say the Urim V'Tumim. Kohen Gadol wore the Choshen, which was the breastplate that contained the 12 stones that had the names of the Shvatim. Underneath the stones themselves were mounted on a fabric garment that had a fold behind it. In that fold was a piece of parchment that had the 72-letter name of the Ribono Shel Olam. That piece of parchment essentially acted like lahavdil as the battery for the Urim V'Tumim. What that then allowed was either the Kohen Gadol or the Melech or the Navi had the ability to ask questions of the Ribono Shel Olam, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu would answer through the Urim V'Tumim. So what happens? And that's incredible. Think about this. Elazar melubash Urim V'Tumim, v'Yoshua v'Klal Yisrael omdim lefanov. So Elazar is wearing the Urim V'Tumim. And Yoshua and all of Klal Yisrael are standing there. And lefanav kalfi shel shvatim, kalfi shel tchum menachem lefanav, vayimechav merach hakodesh. So what happened? We'll say, so Elazar standing there, and what would happen? There were 2 baskets, right? Each of them with lots in them. One basket had the names of the shvatim, the other basket had the names of portions in Eretz Yisrael. And what would happen? The Urim V'Tumim would come out and would say, Reuven gets X. And then what would happen? The representative of Reuven would come forward, pull out a lot that said his name, Reuven, and then pulled out a lot that said the name of his portion, Eretz Yisrael. So essentially you had the lottery, and you had the Shechina going ahead, and the lottery and the Shechina confirming the same information. Now you may ask, so understand, why do you need a lottery and the Shechina to confirm their portionality? So in other words, if the Shechina is saying Reuven gets X, Shimon gets Y, so why do you need for the lottery? So I'll say, so understand something. that with the portions in Eretz Yisrael, when Klal Yisrael got their portions in Eretz Yisrael, that represented a fundamental shift from supernatural existence to natural existence, right? Up until we settled in Eretz Yisrael, so our entire existence is still supernatural, but it's supernatural embedded in the natural. But before our settlement in Eretz Yisrael, so life was supernatural. Life was supernatural. Once we come into Eretz Yisrael, and now again, we have land, we farm the land, we take care of the land, we transition into a natural existence. What's the danger of the natural existence? One could think that the Ribono Shel Olam is not involved. A lottery, right, is the paradigmatic example of chance, of mikra, right? That you could think that there's no hashgacha pratis in a lottery. So incredibly enough, how do we kind of enter into our life in Eretz Yisrael? With Ruach HaKodesh, with the Urim V'Tumim, and the lottery. Just like when the Urim V'Tumim lit up and Elazar HaKohen gave over the message of God, there was no shayla that it was the Ribono Shel Olam who was guiding those events. So the Musar Haskalas, even in the lottery, understand that it's the Ribono Shel Olam who's guiding the events. Hashgacha Pratis, the Ribono Shel Olam's divine providence, devolves upon everything. It devolves upon the supernatural and it devolves upon the natural. There is nothing in this world, no event that happens without the hashgach, without the providence of the Ribono Shel Olam. And that was the most important lesson to learn as we assumed our lives in Eretz Yisrael. And I will say, such a tremendous lesson for us to remind ourselves this day as well, that there is so much teva, there's so much of the natural order of things, but Lamais, again, even in the teva, even in the nature, is always the Yad Hashem. So incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So here's the problem. So how can you model inheritance law after Eretz Yisrael? The division of Eretz Yisrael had a lottery, that's true, but it also had Urim V'Tumim. Am Rav Ashi, this is so beautiful. Bahi Hano, the Katsaisi Lahadadi, Gamri Umakni Lahadadi. So this is beautiful. So Rav Ashi says like this. You're right, but Halacha L'maisa, because the Hana, so we'll say, now what's the Hana over here is, the benefit over here is that the brothers are willing to go ahead and be molded to each other. In other words, that it's in everyone's benefit that the estate gets divided up. So halacha l'maisa, again, in the merit of the Hana, or because of the Hana, that each brother goes and yields to the other. So when Reuven picks out his portion, he acquires it, and the other brothers acquire their portions as well. What does this mean? Take a quick look at the Rashbam. In reality, the concept that when Reuven pulls out his portion, Reuven acquires his portion, the other brothers acquire their portion, that comes from Eretz Yisrael. Umaknu leMishal Agaral Miyad, Mahani Gamar Daitam Im Agaral K'Urim V'Tumim. The Mahani Afilu Heicha Delo Gamri Umakni, the Behahi Hano, the Tzaisi La'adadi, V'Nishma In Zelazeh, Lachlot Begoral, Kedeshito Kol Echad Chalko B'Fnei Asmo, the Inon Chafetzim Od B'Shutfos. Hilchach in Rotzen Shehei Od Iko B'Davar. I will say, the brothers have a vested interest in dividing up the estate. That's what they want. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, when Reuven goes ahead and picks out his portion, they want Reuven to have his portion. Why? So that they can all have their portion as well. So in the zechus of the hana, because of the hana that they get by dividing up the estate, therefore each brother is automatically makneh one to the other. So we'll stop over here for today because it's already a little bit late. But I'm not doing this last piece justice, so we'll start again. I know we're before the 2 dots. We'll start again with this last piece of Meretz Hashem tomorrow. We'll say shkoyach. No, say it. Avraham has. He has Nathan. Nathan Amber. Nathan is. Yeah.